At 8 a.m. on October 3rd, 2017, I was driving my youngest daughter, then 10 years old, to school. Those drives were always fun, as she's a music fan like me and tends to prefer rock and roll over the pop hits of the day. As I listened to a lot of older artists, she developed a habit of asking me, "Is she still alive, Dad?" On that cool, rainy morning, as the windshield wipers were slapping time, I was listening to a Tom Petty mix CD. The Waiting was playing, and my daughter asked, "Who's this, Dad?" "It's Tom Petty, sweetheart." She then innocently asked me, "Who sings Won't Back Down? Is he still alive?" I can't really explain the way my stomach sank at hearing those words and realizing that I didn't want to answer that question for the first time in all the times it had been asked. I couldn't get the words, "He died yesterday," out. It's still hard to say those words. They stuck in my throat and threatened to set off a flood of tears that would rival the steady rain we were driving through. I did eventually tell her that he had died yesterday and that I was feeling very sad about it. I think about that day quite often, especially as my daughter is now a fervent Tom Petty fan herself. I consider how strange it is to mourn the loss of someone you never met and how profound that loss can feel. That sense of loss, amplified by the fact that I never got to see the Heartbreakers perform live, was the shove I needed to really start listening much more closely to a songwriter and performer that I'd grown very gradually to admire a great deal. I've now become somewhat obsessed with Tom's music and his creative genius, and I thought that one way to channel this obsession would be to record a podcast. This is that podcast. I hope you enjoy it.
Tom Petty. Tom Petty Project. Tom Petty. Hey, Tom Petty Project.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to the 21st episode of Season 14 of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown, and this is the only weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. So, the day this episode comes out will be one day after the 5th anniversary of the show. So I wanted to do a little retrospective and put out a shorter episode where I can just sort of reflect on the journey so far that I've had with this catalogue. So I figured the best way to open this week is the way I opened that very first show. And it's the first thing I wanted to talk about. When I listen back to that intro now, I find it kind of painful. I was so conscious of enunciating every single syllable and speaking slowly and being clear and being understood, but to the point that it ends up not really sounding like me. So I wanted to give a shout out to my friend Darcy, who's been listening from day one and very gently suggested that I could and probably should loosen up and try to be myself as much as possible. And it turned out to be very good advice. On my Queen podcast, we take listener questions, and in the last couple of weeks, someone had asked if I would change anything about the podcast based on, where we started and where we are now. So I talked about Seaside Pod Review and what that was like and anything I might change there. But then I sort of commented on the Tom Petty Project and said that I wish I'd spent more time learning how to read naturally. I learned that it's definitely a skill you have to hone, and I do think the difference between Season 1 and Season 14 that we're now in is quite noticeable. So that's one thing I've learned. Reading out loud isn't as easy as it feels like it should be. Alrighty, let's get into some stats. Now, there must be a few of you out there who like spreadsheets and numbers, and I have a massive Google sheet that I maintain with all the numbers I need, downloads, episode length, release dates, guests, recording dates, all that kind of stuff, ratings. So including the trailer released 5 years ago, this is the 297th episode of the show. So we're closing in on 300 eps, which I'll be celebrating in some way with my album rap co-host, John Paulson. 169 episodes have been talking about individual songs, including one song twice and two songs not performed by the Heartbreakers. There have been 88 guest episodes and 41 other formats or special episodes, including the Petty 8, the album wraps, and a bunch of other odds and ends as they occur to me. So if you've listened to every episode of this podcast, it may stagger you to know that you've been listening to me wang on for over 176 hours. To be precise, 7 days, 8 hours, 16 minutes, and 20 seconds. That's a big scary number as I look at it now, but it's absolutely flown by. Okay, so how have the albums and the songs fared? Well, I've awarded 49 songs a perfect 10 out of 10, 15 songs have received a score of 9, 39 songs an 8, and 1 song 6 out of 7.5. Luna, that's going to get re-evaluated again because of reasons. I've given 36 songs a 7, 15 songs a 6, 8 songs a 5, and just 3 songs at a 4 out of 10. Across all 166 uniquely rated songs, my overall average rating is 8.06 out of 10. So I think the most surprising discovery in this breakdown is the low number of 9s. So again, 49 songs a 10 out of 10, 39 songs an 8, but only 15 at a 9. So I wonder if psychologically when I get to a score of 9, it's just easier to go either up to 10 or down to an 8. I also hope that learning this doesn't colour my judgment moving forward. And, my co-host John Paulson regularly teases me that I hand out 10s like candy, but I just rate the songs the way I feel as I'm writing the episodes. Grumpy old John. So, looking across the album rankings, 3 albums have an average rating between 6 and 7 out of 10, while 4 albums fall between 7 and 8. The largest group is between 8 and 9, with 6 albums landing in that range, and right at the top, just 2 albums have achieved an average rating of 9 or better. So, Wildflowers at 9.13 is the top, and The Last DJ comes in second at 9.08. So I think The Last DJ has been the biggest sleeper album in this podcast run so far. It's such a staggeringly brilliant record that you don't really hear being put in people's, best of lists when they're talking about Tom's albums for some reason. I've had 48 different guests on the show and wanted to quickly shout out John Scott, who's my very, very first guest. John took a chance on a brand new podcast with virtually no audience yet and was so unbelievably generous with his time. I spoke to John on October 18th, 2021 and broke up that conversation over 2 episodes for the 2 following weeks. So that was really only 2 months into the show's life. My pal Dallas Helliker was the first fan chat I had, and he's been such an amazing supporter of the show, and also someone I can go to when I have questions about little small details about Tom, because again, sometimes people refer to me as an expert, and I'm just not. Dallas is an expert. In that vein, Pete Nestor and Paul Roberts, as well as Dallas, have also been with me since the start, and the dearly missed Gwen Jones was such a good remote friend before being taken from us far too soon, as well as a very great supporter through Tom Petty Fans Forever, her Facebook group. I've also had some great conversations with musicians through this show, and it's actually made me less focused on trying to hook a big name like a Mike Campbell or a Ben Montench. And look, as much as I'd love to speak to any of the band, I've ended up realising that the conversations I have with indie musicians are just as rich and just as enjoyable. You find that musicians are musicians no matter what level they're at, and when you talk to them about music, about their music, the conversations are always animated, educational, and immense fun. So in terms of guests, the most prolific so far have been, John Paulson, obviously, with 17 appearances, but Pete Nestor comes in next with 6, Jake Thistle with 5, Jeff Slate with 4, and then a whole slew of people on 3 or 2. So I've immensely enjoyed, in particular, my conversation with Dan Speece, the producer of the Tom Petty Weekend in Gainesville, and I'm hoping to chat to him again this year, even though I'm not going to make it to Florida this November, unfortunately. Just timing, holidays, finances, things just don't line up this year, unfortunately, so I won't see you there. I'm sorry. Okay, another thing I've been thinking about a fair bit this week is how my relationship with Tom's music has changed over the years that I've been doing the show. The very short answer to this is I've come to regard him as one of the truly great songwriters. Not just in rock and roll, but just one of the truly great songwriters of all time. And I've talked so often about how impressive his longevity and consistency are to me, but sometimes I think maybe I undersell how just technically sublime he was in almost every area of the craft. It's not just that longevity, and it's not just that relatability to me. So things like I really enjoyed writing that episode covering that idea that specifics create dynamics, but Tom wouldn't always try to do that. He could write a piece of end-to-end lyrical genius like Crawling Back to You, But he also had already written a tongue-in-cheek stream of consciousness jam like A Mind with a Heart of Its Own. You know, he could rip your heart out of your chest with something like Southern Accents or It'll All Work Out, or get it pumping like crazy with an up-tempo rocker, you know, You Wreck Me or Refugee. Now, as my pal John Paulson likes to call them though, Tom was the undisputed king of the mid-tempo banger. So you think about how many perfect rock songs he wrote, like I said, Refugee or I Need to Know or I Should Have Known It. Those were always offset by those mid-tempo gems, The Waiting, Free Falling, Swinging. Another thing I've come to appreciate more than I expected is Petty as a vocalist. I don't think many people outside the Pettyhead community really appreciate just how good a singer he was. And there was such supreme intentionality around every note he sung, especially the further into his career he went. This is the real thing that sets him apart from so many other writers, so many other musicians. He never wanted to stop learning or improving. So when you listen to him talk about the band during the Mojo sessions, one of the things he talks about is how good they're getting. Not how good they are, how good they're getting. Meaning there's still road ahead to travel and still improvement to be sought and attained. That's a pure musician and a pure songwriter. Never slow down, never grow old. The last and maybe it's the most significant discovery is how good these guys were as a band. When I started the podcast 5 years ago, I didn't know anything at all about the live anthology or the Fillmore residency. I didn't know that, as well as a deep and wide catalogue of originals, the Heartbreakers had an extensive laundry list of killer covers they could and did whip out when the mood took them. So over time, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers has rocketed up my list of not just favourite bands, but bands I would put head-to-head against any of the best rock and roll bands in history. Maybe with the exception of only the Beatles, I'd say Tom and the boys could go toe-to-toe with any other rock and roll band in terms of catalogue, and they sit at the very top table when it comes to performance. So to wrap this little bit up, you know, one of the most significant events, or maybe the most significant single event in the life of the show, was the incredible opportunity to head down to Tom's hometown to be a part of the Tom Petty weekend. That experience and the people I met or met in person for the first time, as well as some of the artists I was able to see and subsequently talk to, was just absolutely unbelievable, transformative, you know, life-affirming stuff. You know, if you told me in August 2021 that a kid from Wigan would be stood on a stage in Gainesville talking about that city's most famous son, I just honestly wouldn't have believed you. So again, a huge thanks to Dan Speece for being such an amazing supporter, an incredibly cool guy, and bringing me down to Gainesville for that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Okay, so what's next? Well, we have 2 albums left in the main catalogue, Mojo and Hypnotic Eye. After that, I have to decide how to tackle everything else, and I'm almost decided, but not completely fixed yet, on the idea of going back to cover the B-sides and outtakes that surface later first, and doing that chronologically. And my friend John Paulson had the great idea of packaging those up into groups so that we can still have a sort of a season end, you know, an album wrap equivalent of some sort of reasonable length. Now, obviously, Wildflowers will be an animal all on its own because that's a complete season. We have, you know, the 10 complete songs that were sort of released with Wildflowers and all the rest, plus a bunch of alternate takes and demos. So I'll almost certainly pare some of that down so that we're either covering multiple alternate takes or demos in one episode and really focusing on the ones that are substantially different to the final tracks. Right, before we start signing off, I did want to shout out all my guests. So a massive thank you to John Scott, Dallas Allica, Jake Thistle, the very sadly missed Gwen Jones, the brilliant Paul Zollo, Nick Apostolaris, John Paulson, Janet Lavelle, Jeff Slate, Megan Volper, Dan Speece, my friend Corey Morissette, Katie Moulton, Michael Washburn, the evil pop genius Ivan Anderson of CyberAttack, Scott Haskin, Tommy Edwin, Randy Woods, Matt Jaffe, Russell Mark, Will Porteous, Chris Gillette and Doc Wiley, Trapper Shep, Mark Lindsay, Pete Nestor, Sean McGinnity and Todd McGinnity, Mary Beth Donnelly, my daughter, Emma Brown, Tim Bullman, whose Judge Timber's YouTube channel is an essential source of ground truth in education, Dan Durkin and Django Bayliss from Petty Theft, Nora Hayward Olson, Amelia McLean, Eric Senich, Ian Winnick, the brilliant Sean Murphy of the Tom Petty Trail, Jared Hart, Greg Wolfe, Rich Gibson, Brian Ruskin, Sam Krishnan, Matt Burke, the amazing Shine, Robin Vincent, Steve Ursel, and finally, Josh Caldwell. I know I'll talk to some of these folks again, and I know it will be immense fun. Mainly though, I really honestly, and again, it always sounds a little bit trite saying this, but it is, I say it genuinely, I say it from the heart. Thanks to all of you for listening, for sharing the podcast on social media, and for commenting on the episodes week to week, or even just talking to me offline, or the sort of the social media stuff outside of the podcast, where I'm friends with a lot of people on Facebook that some of you I've met and some of you I haven't, just through this podcast. And it makes my life richer, and it makes my life fuller and happier knowing that you're out there and being super, super cool. It's hard to podcast sometimes, as it can feel like you're just shouting into the void, but the fact that you take the time to leave comments gives me that wonderful way to connect with other fans. Well, 5 years down. Hopefully another 5 or more to go. As I said, once we're through the B-sides, outtakes, alternate takes, we still have Mudcrutch, Traveling Wilburys. We have songs that Tom wrote with or for other people, Johnny Cash, Stevie Nicks, John Prine. There's a laundry list of those songs too. And we have solo albums from Mike Campbell and the Dirty Knobs and Ben Mont that we can dig into, as well as the very mysterious Blue Stingrays and the Speaker Wars. So I'm not even nearly worn out doing this yet. So you are stuck with me for the foreseeable future, and I hope that's okay. Now, obviously, I usually sign off episodes with a rating, and I can't rate my own podcast out of 10 because that would be insufferable. But what I can do is rate the support I've had throughout the last 5 years. That goes up to 11. The Tom Petty Project is a proud member of the Boneless Podcasting Network, which is a loose collective of podcasting friends and acquaintances brought together and championed by the inimitable Chaz Charles. Go check out the roster by clicking on the link in the episode notes, where you can also find my other podcasts, Seaside Pod Review, a Queen podcast that I co-host with my very best friend Randy Woods. You can also check out the Ultimate Catalogue Clash that I co-host with my other great pal Corey Morissette. We are just wrapping up fairly soon in excess, and we'll be moving on to whatever Season 10 has for us. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at The Tom Petty Project, and on Blue Sky at Tom Petty Project. Go follow, like, subscribe as applicable, and again, please leave a review or a rating if you haven't already. Keep talking to me on social media, and I'll keep reading out as many of your comments as I can on the show. And as your weekly reminder, The Tom Petty Project is not affiliated with the Tom Petty Estate in any way. So, when you're looking for Tom's music, please visit official streaming platforms, or better yet, go to a local independent record seller to grab some physical media and support your local businesses. If you're looking for official merchandise, go to store.tompetty.com. And if you're looking for merch for this show, please go to store.tompettyproject.com. Don't forget to check out the Tom Petty Nation and Tom Petty Fans Forever groups on Facebook. And lastly, make sure you're listening to Tom Petty Radio on Channel 31 on Sirius XM. Until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week for another episode of the Tom Petty Project podcast. Bye-bye.